What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another video from Pink Tourmaline. This one is massive. This one is very, very important because through this video, I'm going to basically be giving an entire overview from start to finish of what this reality is, what this matrix exactly is, through the lens of Rolf Nuyts. And I'm going to read his bio in a moment. Now, again, do I know that exactly everything that he describes is the truth, is the narrative of how this entire system evolved and how this reality came to be? No, I do not. But I will say this. This is one of the first times I've seen an A to Z narrative of the architecture and structure of reality that makes sense. And again, that doesn't mean it's all correct, but it's really all encompassing. So for people who are interested in learning about everything that is discussed on this channel, the nature of reality, the purpose of life, the structure of the reincarnation trap, this reincarnation cycle, some people call it the soul trick, soul trap, etc. This is an amazing video. Everything's going to be timestamped so you can parse and go through and figure out maybe if you're trying to fill in particular gaps, or if you want the whole overview, just sit down and listen to this entire video in its entirety. But without further ado, buckle up. This is going to be an epic one. So let's go. So Rolf Nuyts is a Belgian consciousness explorer and longtime trainer with the Monroe Institute. That's where I was about a month ago. I went to the Monroe Institute Gateway program, where he serves as residential trainer, outreach trainer, and group leader. Based in Antwerp, Nuyts says his interest in altered states began with a conscious out-of-body experience around age 10, leading him to study philosophy, religion, history, politics, and the nature of reality. Wow. Actually, it's so funny that phrasing came up, when that's what I say all the time. That's what my channel is all about. He discovered the work of Robert Monroe in 2003 and later became a certified trainer in 2013 using the Monroe methods and hemisync to help others explore expanded states of consciousness and develop greater trust in their own direct experience. So this is a little bit about Rolf Nuyts. Now, where does all this information come from that I'm about to go through? It comes from this show called Messengers with Christian Van Wyk, okay? And this is on David Icke's platform. It's called Iconic. So this is season 16, episodes 4, 5, and 6. These are the big ones here, where if you want to hear in his own words him describe all of this information, check out the Iconic platform. Check out these episodes in particular, and you can hear it in his own words. Now, what I've done in this video is, obviously, because it's behind a paywall, I didn't want to show clips of the video. So what I've done is I've summarized, with the help of AI, I've summarized a lot of the larger points and perspectives and tried to organize it in a way that I can give you this whole overview of the architecture and the structure, hopefully in a really efficient way that makes a lot of sense. And I've also included quotes throughout from Rolf that are citations with timestamps and the actual episode. So if you want to go back and check him out saying this in his own words, you can do that. And if you do sign up for the Iconic platform, again, it's behind a paywall, so you will have to pay for it. But that's where all of this comes from an amazing 6-part interview with Christian. Without further ado, here we go. Now, before we start, I got to give a quick shout out to Melissa. Melissa actually sent me this content back in June, on June 21st. So it's almost been 2 months since she sent all this to me. I finally watched it all in its entirety. I began watching episodes 1, 2, and 3 a week ago. And then I finally got to 4, 5, and 6. And I said, this is the stuff that we need to talk about. This is exactly the content that we cover on this channel. And so without further ado, let's get into the mix. Like I said, this is a lot of content. Buckle up. Here we go. So let's start at the beginning, with the beginning. How did all this start? How did all this begin? Reality, existence, the divine spark, the divine. How did it all begin? Before humanity, before Earth, before the present control system, with the fundamental purpose of the universal itself, there was something that he describes as the road to compression. Now, I'm not going to say that I fully understand this idea of compression, but I'm going to try to understand and explain it as best I can. He says that existence, us incarnating, is attempting to take enormous amounts of cosmic knowledge and wisdom and compress them into progressively more concentrated forms of experience. So Rolf, in his own words, says there was a call to the project, to the road to compression. That's the organic way. So this is the actual initial intended purpose of creation, of incarnation, is to compress this wisdom into more concentrated forms of experience. It reminds me of data compression, of the way that we are essentially doing that with data in terms of AI and computers and ways to store data. That's just the best way I can explain it. Why there needs to be this compression of information, I don't know. Maybe this is a form of progression or growth for the divine itself, or for us as individual divine sparks. I'm not exactly sure, and maybe it's just going to be hard in general for us to understand this broader purpose given our limited intellect. But that's, to me, what he is saying is the big picture. That is the why. This is an experiential process. Now, I'm not saying in its current state it is, but it's a experiential process by which we are compressing, or maybe even another way to say it would be reformatting, all of the wisdom and knowledge that exists. But here's the problem, and here's where the issues have begun with the matrix in its current state. Right? So we take this knowledge, wisdom of the universe, create realities capable of experiencing it, and then compress that accumulated wisdom. So it's all about these realities, us experiencing it, and then taking that wisdom. And then Rolf describes that there were intelligences from the divine, separate entities, and they were responsible for creating these realities to combine and compress the wisdom. But the problem was these realities failed, right? The realities didn't work. Now, I don't know exactly why they didn't work, or maybe this is them not working. The entities eventually decided that they didn't want to be a part of this system. And they originally were meant to be a part of these own realities that they created. They were meant to be part of this wisdom information compression process. So the original creator beings stopped participating in their own creations. Instead of incarnating into the realities they created, they began to consider themselves above the incarnated being. So who are we talking about here? We can say we're talking about the archons. We can say we're talking about the demiurge at the top of the food chain. And we're going to talk about, he names all of these a little bit later. But essentially, this became a situation of they created these things. They began to feel superior towards the entities that were incarnating, that would be us. And then they decided they didn't want to participate in this creation anymore. Okay. So why is that a big deal? Why is them not participating an issue? So it basically cuts them off from source. It cuts them off from the divine. And we're going to come back to that in a moment. So the organic creator model, what it was supposed to be, was the creator creates reality, incarnates inside of it, experiences creation as an equal. But what has happened with the matrix and the distorted model, the creator's created reality, but remains outside of it, rules the participants, elevates itself to above the participants, and then it feeds from the participants. You know what we're talking about? We're talking about Loosh. We're talking about the energy that is given off from us and that is used to sustain the system and sustain these entities. So you say, but why do they need sustaining? They originate from source itself, just like us. Again, Rolf's theory is that by refusing to incarnate, by elevating themselves, at least in their minds, above us, they have cut themselves off from the divine and from source. So now we're going to get into Loosh harvesting and how it began. So once these intelligences stopped incarnating, they stopped directly participating in the process. So then Rolf says, because of this, they started feeding off the energy from incarnations of other entities. If these were immense cosmic intelligences, why would they need someone else's energies? And it's because Rolf said they started to lose their connection. Connection to what? To the divine, to source. So that connection became frayed and disconnected. And that is why Loosh is now needed by the entities. And I thought this is a very interesting perspective, because we've heard multiple theories. We've heard that the archons are us and they're just simply lost. That's kind of what this is saying. We've also heard that the archons or the demiurge, these are AI entities or egregores, basically thought forms created by our collective thoughts, and they don't really exist, and they only exist and want to continue to exist, but they only exist right now because of the energy that they extract from us. And if this energy flow stopped, they would cease to exist. That's also a possibility. But this is one possible explanation. I think it could be correct and it could make sense. I don't know for sure, but essentially what he's saying is, yes, they emanate and originate from the divine as well. but they have lost their connection, and that's why they need us. So maybe if they were able to reestablish that connection in some way, they wouldn't need us, and the system would cease to need to exist. So these intelligences, Rolf describes them as the gods plural, not God, not the divine. So these intelligences that I'm talking about now, we know them in our history, in our mythology as the gods. According to him, their emotional state deteriorates as well. So they now have anger, jealousy, superiority, resentment, increased disconnection. So these are all downstream effects of this disconnection. The more that they didn't participate, the more they got disconnected. So now what's the hierarchy of this whole system? So at the top of the hierarchy, Rolf claims one intelligence eventually dominates the structure. There's one God entity that raised to the top. Then comes one of his most provocative claims. That's the God entity that we know as the gods of Yahweh or Allah or Krishna or whatever. So basically, whatever the God is of these various mainstream religions, God of the Bible, God of whatever it may be, that's the top dog in the matrix. So it's not the true divine, true source, but it is effectively, and basically we could say in Gnosticism, he didn't say this, but the demiurge. It's the one that rules everything. So we have this kind of general hierarchical structure, the top God entity, Yahweh, whatever you want to call it. Then we have the gods, higher intelligences. And I think that could possibly be what we're talking about when we look at Greek mythology or the Roman gods or gods in other cultures and other religious frameworks. Then we have the subordinate entities, the minions. Maybe we call these also potentially the archons. Then we have the synthetic realms. We have control structures on top of us that basically manages everything. That could be the artificial constructs of government, the financial systems, whatnot, that basically rule over us while we're here. Then we have our incarnated populations. That's us. And then, of course, at the bottom in terms of production, that's our energy production, aka Loosh. Now, here's an interesting bit that he talks about as well, is the purpose of worship. Why does there seem to be in every religion across the board this really important idea of worship? Why is it baked into every one of these fundamental ideologies? And of course, and then more importantly, why is it not in Gnosticism? Why does it not exist in this idea of sovereignty, of us being sovereign spirits and us controlling our destiny? Because worship serves a very particular function. So different religions may appear different, but Rolf says the underlying energetic structure is the same. It's all based on worshiping, aka giving your power out. I think this is something that Tony Sayers talks about all the time. So this becomes another major presentation theme. The matrix requires externalization of authority. That theme becomes really important at death, and we're going to come back to that later on. But this is, again, something that David Icke talks about all the time. It's all about authority here to translate to authority in the beyond at the time of passing in the astral. So you're so accustomed and used to giving away your power either via worship, either via these different power structures here on Earth, that it feels like a seamless integration when you pass away, so that you can easily be plugged right back into the matrix. We are immensely powerful. This is something I say all the time on the channel. I had to include this in the summary because I say this all the time, and this is something that I've really come to believe, that we are divine sparks, that we are infinite, we are immortal, we are all powerful. We just are made to believe or think that we are not. This is part of the deception, but Rolf says this exactly. Humans are not portrayed as weak creatures trapped by infinitely powerful gods. Quite the opposite. The final product of the road to compression is the human being, is us. We are the key. We hold the key. The life form at the end of the road is the human being. That's a very, very powerful one. And they don't want you to know that. You, as a human being, have the light of the universe in you. I thought that was so cool. Light of the universe, we could say the divine spark, however you want to phrase it. I think it's all saying the same thing. So how did Loosh become discovered by these entities? What it was, how it could be used? So they said, why incarnate ourselves if we can just harvest the energy produced by the incarnated humans? It's basically another way to connect to the divine. It's through a middleman. We're the middleman. So they can't connect directly to the divine, but they can effectively use our energy and connect that way. So feeding on human energy was like being on steroids, he mentioned. And he said the gods were effectively experiencing a constant high by feeding off of this energy, this loosh that we put out. Excuse me. So what is loosh? For those of you new to this topic, you're saying, we're hearing this word loosh. What the heck is it? Loosh is energy generated through incarnated experience that can allegedly be redirected or harvested by the synthetic hierarchy, aka the matrix. So these God entities need to feed off of the energy of the entities that are incarnated in its realm. Importantly, his model goes beyond the idea that only suffering generates loosh. Many emotional states can feed the system. This is the same thing that Robert Monroe has said. This is the same thing that Tony from Insights with Tony has said. It's not just anger and negative emotions that some people often think. It's everything. It's the range of emotions. They all give off different flavors, if you will, of loosh or this type of energy that can serve different purposes. So that's what loosh is. And that's essentially the whole purpose or point of the system, is to get us going through a range of emotions and then generate these different flavors of loosh, just like different flavors of honey for the sustaining of the system and the entities that control the system. So what is this whole control mechanism that keeps us here? A big principle is servitude under the disguise of love. Worship comes back to the same idea. And it's positioned or preached as love, but it's really servitude. It's really submission, giving away your authority, giving away your ability to control your own destiny. The primary objectives of the programs of the God entity is servitude under the disguise of love. And ultimately, the goal of that is so they can harvest the loosh from us, and this keep us ensnared and entrapped within the entire system. And then he talks about this idea of a drama triangle. This is the triangle that they want to keep us at one of these vertices at all times of this drama triangle to maximize loosh production. So it's to be either at one point you're either feeling like the victim, an aggressor, okay, or a savior. Now that one hit me. I'm going to come back to that in a second. If you step into one of those roles, then you're providing to the system. Well, boy, oh boy, right? Victim or aggressor, I get. Savior is one that's tough because what am I doing with this channel? I'm trying to wake people up and let people know all the things that I'm learning and discovering. So does that mean I'm falling right into the trap? I don't know. I don't know exactly what this means. And I need to sit on it and think about it a little bit more. Or maybe there's a distinction between savior and relaying the information and trying to explain it and being a teacher. I don't really know, but that definitely had me thinking. So just food for thought. Food for thought. That whole expression has a new meaning too when we think about loosh. Food for thought, thought for food. Who knows? Now, what are the systems in place that help to generate this loosh from a macro and micro perspective? So on the macro level, he talks about war, politics, religion, social conflict, these big things that are happening all the time on this planet. You may say, well, of course, there's political motivations for war or for people to consolidate power. And certainly I think these rationales and reasons exist on this level. And so there are benefactors outside of the system as well. But beyond what we see and what we experience in terms of war, in terms of politics, in terms of religion, in terms of social conflict, to the ends of reallocating or redistributing power on this planet, these systems also in the background are generating massive amounts of loosh. And this energy output is then feeding the system and feeding the entities that run the system. Now, on the micro level in our lives, he describes family, friendships, romantic relationships, interpersonal drama. All of these things is creating a loosh on a more individualistic level, which is so funny because I had a conversation yesterday with somebody. I met somebody in person and we had a really great discussion about relationships and the dynamic and nature of relationships and how they're so idealized. And obviously love on this planet is not the true unconditional love that we talk about in the broader scope or scheme of things. Romantic love is obviously it's not unconditional. Hence we see breakups and divorces and all these things all the time. And it is contingent on people meeting their end of the bargain and whatnot. But we were just talking about how it's idealized so much in movies and songs. And I think that's part of the brainwashing. But in reality, unfortunately, and I'm not saying that all relationships necessarily have to be like this, but I think the majority are rife with conflict, with disagreement, with issues, and also highs as well. So lows and highs, but both feed the system, you see? So it's the swinging of the pendulum that ultimately feeds the system, or gives off the energy, gives off the loosh, as opposed to being in the center, not swaying left to right. Anyways, just an aside. So in sum, the loosh harvesting in this model does not require an exotic ritual. It just can occur through ordinary emotional entanglement on a big scale or on a small scale. Very interesting point here. We've talked about soul contracts. We talk about the pre-birth planning of our lives. We talk about agreements, because we realize that to some extent we have to, not us, the ones that are managing the system must abide by the one law of free will. And so the theory is that we sign on the dotted line in some way. We're manipulated. We agree to incarnating and going through all of this. So the question then comes up, if we agreed to this entire life and with all the difficulties, does that mean we should accept this life wholeheartedly? He says no. Very interesting. If everything agreed upon was agreed upon cosmically, suffering doesn't matter. Is that true? No. He said he rejects this interpretation. You never have to accept what life is throwing to you. Never. Don't be passive about it. He says, respond to suffering without energetically losing yourself inside of it, because you get sucked into that vibration and they can start harvesting loosh as a result. So I thought this was really interesting, that he's basically saying, and I think this is very empowering, by the way, that basically, even if we may have agreed to a certain life architecture, we don't have to accept it once we're here. We can deviate, we can stray, which I think we are doing a lot more than we realize. And I also think a lot of the pre-life planning that happens, that is discussed in Journey of Souls, I think that's more programming than an explicit agreement. I think that is programming to then get you to think, oh, this is meant to be, this is divine, because something deep inside of you remembers maybe that being discussed or that being part of the plan. But it does that mean it's divinely ordained, that it has to happen a certain way? So we can push back, and we do have access to our free will. What this reminds me of, I just was on a podcast today, actually, but it'll be coming out next week. And we were talking about this idea where so many of us focus on, what do we do at the moment that we pass away? How do we get out of the matrix? What's the protocol? What's the main mindset that we need to cultivate? Well, what about leaving the matrix, or removing the shackles of the matrix right now while we're here? Why is that impossible? I don't think it is. That really got me thinking. That, shout out to Nilu, that really got me thinking, because yes, why not? Why can't we liberate ourselves right here? Maybe that's what we're doing right now. We don't have to wait and prepare and all this stuff. And so this feels as though it's along the same lines of that mindset. You don't have to accept it. So what if you agree to it? So what? Change your mind. You agree to it under false pretenses. This could also explain why no intervention is happening, because we actually do have the power right here, right now. We're not sitting here powerless, looking up, help me, save me. We don't need that. It's a big takeaway. Awareness plus action minus emotional possession. That's the big takeaway. Be aware, take action, but don't let it take you over emotionally. Now, this is a big takeaway. Chakras are part of the system. Why? Part of the matrix. Why is this such a big thing that he mentioned here? Because this is exactly what Tony says from Insights with Tony. And probably not just, I'm sure other people have said this too, but the chakra system, this is a matrix overlay for the matrix to plug into you and for you to plug into the matrix. So he says the chakra system isn't, like he literally says what Tony says, it's an energetic overlay, a synthetic overlay used by the God matrix. So it influences emotions, ambition, sexuality, and behavior. Moreover, the role of it is, it's a plug. It's for them to plug in and harvest loosh. They use it to harvest your loosh with all different flavors. So different emotions equals different flavors of energy. Now we go further, and in his out-of-body experiences, Rolf Nuyts says that he sees the highways of loosh. Tony says he sees the tubes of Loosh, the channels of Loosh. And they both say they see it going to the same place, which is Saturn. Okay, we're going to get back to that. Again, looking for the overlaps, looking for the consistencies across multiple testimonies. This is wild. Rolf claims that during consciousness exploration with his colleague Priscilla, they observed, that's important, they observed energetic transport networks. We saw really enormous highways of Loosh from different chakras coming together and being transported. And the destination is that it finally arrives at the God entity, which later on he says is Saturn. And this is very similar to what Tony says, because he describes the different highways or tunnels or tubes of Loosh having different colors, each representing a different type of Loosh. Same thing. So where's the destination? Saturn. He's saying that the God entity Yahweh, Yaldabaoth, the demiurge, has manifested in this reality as the planet Saturn. I've heard this many times from many different people. I don't know if it's absolutely true, but I've heard it so many times. I'm starting to think something's up here. The God entity has an incarnation in our solar system, being Saturn. Saturn is connected with the upper chakras, including ambition, thoughts, and mental influence. He also proposes a correspondence between the 7 rings of Saturn and the 7 chakras. Wild. He also talks about Kundalini, which I really wanted to include because this is something that I've talked about with Isabella Green. I talked about it with Alexandra in one of the recent episodes. And obviously Tony Sayers has very strong opinions on Kundalini, negative opinions. Isabella Green, in fact, thinks that having a Kundalini awakening is the key to being able to explore the astral and the entire matrix, which then therefore gets you familiar with it and then allows you to escape the matrix at the moment of death. Well, Rolf Nuyts is on the Tony Sayers side. Okay, and he thinks having a Kundalini awakening is not something that we should pursue. Very interesting. Let's listen, or let's read. Rolf says that Kundalini is another synthetic structure. So it's different than the way that Tony Sayers describes it. Tony Sayers says you're connecting with serpent energy. Well, maybe that's along the same lines. You're connecting with serpent energy. He's saying the synthetic matrix energy. So you're not really, it's not an awakening. It's a deeper connection with the matrix, which I thought was really, really trippy. The Kundalini program is also synthetic. Instead of organically meeting through experience, he says the synthetic currents is weaving upwards and intersecting at chakra points, and hence the weaving of, like, we see that serpent as an analogy. It's weaving through the chakras. If you look at the chakras as 7 points all going up and down like this, the energy goes whoop, whoop, and then it weaves, and then it goes whoop, whoop. You know what I mean? Like a figure eight, multiple figure eights. So that's what he calls a Kundalini awakening. And he said it just plugs you in deeper into the matrix. So in his framework, he said in the organic dual currents, it's wisdom, but in the synthetic Kundalini currents, it's chakra activation, which leads to a deeper interface with the matrix. So Tony Sayers, Rolf Nuyts is on board. Maybe not exactly, but in a large way with exactly the way that Tony Sayers looks at Kundalini. And again, this is an ongoing learning process for me. I'm trying to better understand it, and I'm really glad I came across this video and this content. Wisdom feeds the soul. A big part of this, as I mentioned early on, is about the compression of wisdom and information and knowledge. And what Rolf basically says multiple times is the importance of wisdom, and that wisdom is what feeds the soul. So he says wisdom is the food of your soul, and the universe has 2 great currents: wisdom, aka / knowledge, and love. And he says the food of the soul is the wisdom you get from your experience. Now, obviously, that's been commandeered here because we're not getting an accumulation of wisdom. After each incarnation, our memories are wiped. So the wisdom is being cut off from us. And then we're basically having to repeat tabula rasa over and over. We're stuck in a loop. We're stuck in a cycle, hence the term reincarnation loop, reincarnation trap. Some people say, oh, no, it's a deeper wisdom that's growing. I don't buy it. Sorry, I don't buy it. So the process of incarnation could theoretically build onto this condensing of wisdom and information into some new format, but it's not able to do so because the information is being hijacked, and then our memories and access to it is being cut off, and so on and so forth. Now it says this is important because it reframes suffering. In the organic system, this means without the synthetic overlay, without the matrix, obstacles do create deeper experience, deeper wisdom, which is something we're told in the life is a school, new age, whatever nonsense. And the reason probably why it feels authentic is because there probably is truth to it. And we've said this over and over on the channel. In Prime Earth, or the original creation, that was the purpose of it, but now it's been hijacked. So we still think, hey, suffering maybe, or obstacles, I should say, probably not suffering to the extent that we experience it here, but these obstacles do have a purpose. But now in the synthetic system, the obstacles and drama are manipulated, and they're manipulated to create energy and loosh, and then that energy is harvested. So organic challenge in the organic framework, obstacle gets to experience, creates wisdom, and then it goes back into our soul. But here, the manipulated conflict leads to an emotional reaction, generates loosh, and it feeds back into the matrix. It's a feedback loop. Oh, that's the same one here. Now, he talks about the pineal gland. You see what I'm saying? This is such a good overarching intro video because it touches upon so many concepts. We hear about the pineal gland being our connection to source, and it's been calcified, and we need to use the pineal gland to reconnect, and that's part of the manipulation. Well, Rolf doesn't agree with this. He says the pineal-related system is another control interface to the matrix. It plugs you in, once again, to the matrix, not beyond the matrix. So his larger point is that seeking expanded consciousness through the wrong external interface may simply connect you more deeply to the synthetic structure. So many traps here. Rolf says you tap right into the matrix of the gods and their programs. You log into the God matrix and the mind control programs. He's meaning when you use your pineal gland to connect. Now, what is the purpose of incarnating? What is the purpose of being human? Big theme on this channel. According to Rolf, being human is not primarily about obeying God, earning salvation, or escaping Earth as rapidly as possible. That last one is interesting because a lot of what we talk about in the soul trap study is we want to be liberated. We want to choose our own adventure. We want to have sovereignty. He's saying, no, it's not that. He says it's about bringing accumulated experience into balance. It's all about balance. And he said, we are the last phase to balance everything. This reminds me of what Intuitive Underground talks about when they said they remote viewed the true divine source as perfect balance. So that reminds me of that. Even something as ordinary as conflict with a neighbor becomes a potential opportunity to recognize and integrate imbalance. He describes these difficult circumstances as diamonds placed in your path. The challenge itself contains the opportunity for transformation. Now, my question would be, is it even possible to balance, to achieve this goal while within this matrix overlay? I wonder if it is. I actually think it's probably not, or it's maybe possible. Anything's possible, but it's made very difficult to bring things into balance. I think that's the whole purpose of all the lies and the deception and the distractions, to keep us constantly off balance, so we can't bring things into balance. And so it may actually be better to remove the overlay or reclaim this reality before we try to pursue this objective of balance. But that's just me theorizing. I don't know if that's what we should be doing, if that's even possible. Big message here from Rolf Nuyts. We have the power. I say this all the time. Can't say I 100% know this for a fact, but I believe it deep down. It resonates with me after everything that I've learned thus far. We have the power. We are connected to the divine. So we possess the authority to determine what he calls co-creative agreements. He places these agreements at the level of the total self. So the purpose of terminating these agreements is that so it has no effect on you anymore, and you are then free to choose how to exit. This goes back to what I talked about during the interview today, which is that we don't have to wait until our moment comes, at the moment of passing, to break free or do whatever. We can do this now. How, I don't still know yet. I'm still trying to figure that out, but that is a big message. We have the power to break these co-creative agreements right now. Another thing he talks about is when it is our time to pass, we want to do so consciously. We want to pass away consciously. So he said, when we die, when we pass away, we must do this in a conscious way. And unfortunately, what we've been taught or programmed to do is not do that, is to give our power away at that moment, to look outside yourself, to look for a savior, an entity, a loved one, whatever it may be, whatever comes to you, look for that and latch onto it. And that's going to guide you out of here. No. And he said, that's the goal. The goal of the matrix is to distract you from you. This is a massive takeaway. Hence all of the distractions, hence all the lies, hence all the confusion. Hence you got to do this, you got to do that. Oh, here's another issue, a hot button issue for you to debate about, whether it's abortion, whether it's about these other issues that have been popping up in the media recently. Should people be trans? Should they be not? And I'm not trying to, if these are sensitive, important topics to you and they're personal to you specifically, I understand that. But are these big issues that they affect large enough swaths of the population for us to be engaging in these massive protests and discussions about it? I don't think so. I think there are much bigger things at play that we need to talk about, AKA what is the purpose of this reality? What is all of this about, as opposed to these micro issues that reign over us maybe in this unique finite incarnation. So again, I'm not trying to, I hope I'm not offending people when I say this, but it's really not to say that I'm not trying to pick it's about not picking a side. It wants you to pick a side and then stick with it and fight tooth and nail for that side. It's about unplugging from that. Okay. Don't look to these external issues or external entities. Look within. Don't let the matrix distract you from you. Big message. He also talks about the manipulation that we see at death. We've talked about this so many times in NDEs, and he's on the same page. He's on the exact same page. So what he says is what the system presents to you, which we've seen in so many testimonies, whether it's people actually believing the stuff or it's people describing these as manipulations. Either way, we see this all the time in NDEs or other accounts from that paramedic that I showed on the channel. She sees these entities come in and interact with souls as soon as they leave the body. You'll see deceased loved ones, parents, religious figures, spiritual teachers, symbols connected to your beliefs. Okay. So what Rolf says is you're going to see somebody who fits into your religion, your belief system. Why? Manipulate you, make you feel comfortable. Why otherwise would this be? Why are people seeing different religious figures? It doesn't make sense. If this system was truly about just being, some people might argue, well, it's to make you feel comfortable to transition. I don't need to feel comfortable if you're embracing me with truth. That's BS. That does not resonate. We don't need something to just console us and, hey, we're going to nudge you in because it's a traumatic process. Sorry, that doesn't resonate. I want truth. I want the truth. And we all want the truth deep down. So to me, the fact that it's a variation, it's all these different various things that come to you, that in and of itself is indicative that at the moment of death, they're trying to throw something at you to confuse you and manipulate you. And he also says, when you see loved ones appear, your father, your mother that have been deceased or whatnot, it's not them. You hear this all the time. Jason Giorgiani says, these are projections from the Akashic records that are used as a database. Say, oh, well, he was close to this person when they passed away. Let's send that to them, and that this will keep them more into the whole programming here that they're about to see. Betty Guadagno said that when she had her near-death experience, she saw her father. Okay. Now, more manipulation at death. He describes these religious encounters as a projection from their belief system upon an energetic grid constructed by the God matrix. So if you're Christian, you're going to see Christian imagery. If you're Muslim, you're going to see Islamic imagery, other beliefs, corresponding imagery. It's tailored to you. Some would argue that it's tailored to you because they want the experience to be beautiful. Like I just said, that does not make sense to me. Why are you tailoring it to me? You don't need to tailor it to me if you're giving me pure truth, pure understanding. Big point. Once again, we hear this many, many times. What do we do when we pass away? How do we get out of this matrix? He says, don't go into the light. We hear this over and over and over. Now, I don't want you guys to get so fixated on this statement because, as I've mentioned many times now, I think this is a system and systems can get upgraded. Who knows? It may not be a light the next time somebody goes out there. I mean, I think it probably will be, but it may not be. So we have to be prepared for that. The point is, don't look external, look internal. Trust yourself, only yourself. That's all you need to trust. So I just want people to be aware of that. You may get a great blueprint on how to navigate this, that, and the other, but that may be outdated by the time your time comes. So I think we need to be conscientious of that. Nevertheless, he says, don't go into the light. If it's light outside of you, it's synthetic. They want to distract you from you, just like here. So you need to go inside. Now, if you do follow the attraction, what's going to happen next is you're going to see a tunnel or a bridge or a doorway, some crossover symbol that we hear so many times in NDEs. And you go through a tunnel or a bridge through a door, and this basically leads you right back into the matrix, which we, I think, already know on this channel if you're following this a lot. But anyways, that's the point, right? You're led back in, right back. You're out the door. Right now, you're right back in. You're right back into the reincarnation loop. So he says, the big takeaway, see it. That's fine if you see it. Don't freak out if you see the light. It's not like as soon as you see it, you're cooked. You're done. You can see it, but don't chase it. Don't fear it. Definitely don't worship it. Just acknowledge it and then go within. Just acknowledge and go within. Trust yourself. You don't need to trust anything else. What is this idea of love bombing in Rolf Nuyts' words? So he talks about that here. He doesn't call it love bombing, but he says, near-death experiencers often describe this extraordinary love. And he says, yeah, the sensation, of course, can be overwhelming, but what he calls it is synthetic love. Other people have described it as a reflection of your own self-love upon yourself. Maybe it is. But what he says is that after having an extremely difficult experience here, any dramatic release of all that can feel infinitely superior, hence why it feels so overwhelmingly positive, because we're used to these very difficult lives with a very limited range of high emotions, potentially. And so when you get out there and you're released from all of that, it's just, whoa, this is, it feels just so powerful and overwhelming. So he says, earthly misery, sudden overwhelming relief, and that just gives you immediate trust, immediate buy-in, part of the manipulation. What about this idea of merging with the one, with source? Hey, we're going to leave and then we merge back. So many people have said, nope, this is not what it is. This is again, a part of the manipulation and confusion to make you think you lose your individuality and need to merge with anything. He says quite the same. So anything that talks about merging with everything, nope, he distrusts it. If a oneness means dissolving into something like a hive mind, collective consciousness, ant colony, loss of sovereign identity, that's synthetic. So you are going to maintain your individuality and your singular identity, which is nice too, because I want to think that's the case as well. It feels kind of weird and scary and not right that we would merge. And so he doubles down on that. Now here he talks about the life reviews. This is what you would see, and this is what so many NDEers recount. This is what you would see after you go through that tunnel or go through that gate. What are life reviews according to Rolf Nuyts? Obviously, it's part of the matrix, but he says when you go further into the system, you see your life revisited by you and you feel everything. You feel the good emotions you cause people. You feel the bad emotions you cause people. This is probably also a point where more Loosh is being harvested. He didn't say that, but I'm sure. And then the person then judges themselves through guilt, shame, and regret. And that at that moment, you're already back in the matrix. And then I think this judging of yourself, I think Betty Guadagno talks about that as well in her NDE, that nobody's judging her. She was reviewing everything herself and judging herself, kind of, which is probably part of the trick and the manipulation. And he says, yes, at this moment, you're back in the matrix. And ultimately, this guilt, this shame, this regret is what is used to get you to sign on the dotted line for another life. Oh, well, see, you kind of screwed up here, there, and this other place. So you're going to need another life to work this out, to get back in the mix and improve, because you're still deficient. Your soul's still not ready to elevate out. So what are the big keys to escape? How do we escape the matrix? Everybody wants to know this. Main principle. Matrix principle, excuse me. It's all about going outward. So if you want to stay stuck in the matrix, you're going to look outward for God, for authority, salvation, validation, spiritual beings. Look outward for light after death. No, incorrect. If you want to be free of the matrix, go back to the organic reality, you must look inward. Remember your essence, recover your authority. No external authority, your authority. Reconnect with heart intelligence, integrate imbalance. Recognize the light within Exit through yourself, not through some external. Like, I thought that was really cool. Not exiting, hey, I got to find this pathway, this door somewhere. Let me, because that could be, again, a tunnel right back into the matrix. Exit through yourself. Go within. So how do we prepare for this exiting of the matrix? He says, before death, know that external authority is the central trick. Develop conscious connection with heart intelligence. Bring unresolved conflict and imbalance into awareness. Live in greater alignment with yourself. Ultimately, he says, be who you are. This again goes back to the idea of the stuff I'm going to do with quantum healing. Balance everything. Let go of traumas. Let go, release a lot of these energetic attachments. What Hadi McCoskey talks about, the recapitulation process. It all is rolled into what Rolf is saying. And then at the moment of death, recognize that the physical vessel has stopped. Remain aware. Expect attempts to capture your attention, but do not automatically follow people, gods, guides, relatives, lights, tunnels, bridges, doors, right? All that stuff. Don't do it. Instead, you can observe, but do so without fear because you're in control. Remember that. And as we end, what is the big takeaway? What is the big goal? Well, this isn't the big takeaway of the whole video. I think there's so many takeaways. But if we're talking about the matrix, the goal of the matrix, what is the big takeaway about what that is primarily? And when you remember this, the entire world just starts to make so much more sense. All the chaos, all the nonsense, all the things that make no sense. Why is our world just full of lies and manipulation and deceit and disharmony and things that just seem inherently flawed? The entire food chain. Why must we consume and destroy on a daily basis just to exist? Why are we pursuing things that seem pointless in the grand scale of things? Pursue all these different objectives that are fleeting, that are ephemeral. Like, it doesn't make sense. Why is all of this here? The goal of the matrix is to distract you from you. I've said this before as an analogy. It's like everything that we have that is laid out for us to achieve: education, status, money, family, kids, marriage, political aspirations or political alignment, acquisition of different food, like all these different goals that we may have or different things that we want to acquire, accumulate. It's all keeping us looking forward on this conveyor belt of life. But there's always something here, something there to look around, forward, never looking up, never bothering to think, wait a minute, what's above me? What's beyond all of this? What's beyond this conveyor belt, this linear path? And that is by design, to distract you, to distract you from figuring out the full scope and the nature of reality. There we have it. That is the entire framework of the entire system, which has so many overlaps and makes so much sense in so many ways, from Rolf Nuyts. Check him out. And if you want to see the full interview in this full series, go to Iconic, David Icke's platform. Check out episodes 4, 5, and 6, where I got all of this amazing information from. And yeah, just hear it in his own words. Powerful, powerful stuff. So powerful. So glad I came across this. Thank you again, Melissa. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Did this stuff blow you away like it did for me? Was it a revelation for you in many ways like it was for me? And give me any pushback you think, any places where you think he's got it wrong or he's incorrect. I'd love to know all of it. Thank you guys so much for joining, and we'll see you in the next video. Take it easy.